Welcome to Business and Life with Ataande Advisors. We do mentoring, coaching, and free consultations on entrepreneurship, leadership, and career development. I'm excited to have on entrepreneur today, Chris, who is the founder of the stock exchange. He's going to ask some questions and he'll introduce himself. A little bit more about myself. I am a four-time business owner. I am angel investor. I have attorney as well, and I'm adjunct professor. I also read about 700 books over the last 4 years, and my passion really is to give back some of the information I wish I learned growing up and trying to run my own businesses. So with that, I would love to bring on Chris so he can start sharing some of his questions, share a bit about his background, and we'll get into it.
Hey, Achinburo, thanks for having me on. It's a privilege and an honor to be on Ataande Advisors. So a little bit about myself. I am an aspiring Renaissance man and an entrepreneur by trade. I started my company, the Stock Exchange, in 2020 while I was still in college. The company focuses on kinesthetic financial literacy education, and I still run that today. I also work with other entrepreneurs on the flip side of the funding coin as a venture capitalist, and I do a little work in investor relations as well. So I'm excited to ask you some questions to hopefully clarify the path going forward.
No, that's phenomenal. I would love to start off with asking what made you start your business and how did you decide to start a I know a little bit background because we met at the Columbia the African Columbia Business Conference, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so similar to the premise of the podcast, it was I wanted to share education that I wish I had learned at a younger age, and that was more so thinking back on the education that I wish I had known. When I was 16, I wasn't exactly the most astute student, so I wanted to teach this kind of financial education, which some can see as a traditionally boring topic, if you will, in a more fun way. So I learned in my research before starting the company that kinesthetic or interactive learning is actually 90% more effective. So
Mm,
everybody has one of three or a combination of the three learning styles, which is auditory, visual, or kinesthetic, and that
mhm.
kinesthetic component is 90% more effective than the other two. So I started thinking, how can I create lessons in a way that engage students in a hands-on manner for something that's more of a digital concept?
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I would love to jump into your first question and see what I can do to help.
Yeah, much appreciated, and thanks for giving me the space to share. So my first question is, how should I know when to walk away? And to give a little bit of more context on that, is from an idea or like a person or a partnership or even a philosophy.
Wow, that is a very big question. That's a very big question.
Yeah, it's one that I've been struggling with for a little bit, so would love to hear your input from your experience.
So I think it differs based on the category. So if you can give me the one or two categories that are front of your mind, and we can explore it from there. And I'll say what may change my decision matrix if it's a different
Mhm.
category, if it's a different point in your life.
Sure. So I would say from an idea. So as I'm sure you're aware, as an entrepreneur, you have a million ideas and they kind of build off of one another. So how do you know when it's time to transition from an idea that has been successful into maybe a new idea, or how do you transition from an idea that have not been as successful as you wanted it to be into a different version of that or something completely new?
So that's a great question. So it's I will say there's two different phases. I'll break this down into different phases. I'll say there's the first phase when you're starting a business, right? The idea or the value proposition that you're offering the market. That's one phase, right? That's one way to analyze it. And then there's another phase when you're running a business, but maybe you want to create a new vertical, right? You want to create a new product line, service line, etc. So those are there's two different ways I'll analyze that. The first one, when you're starting and running a business, I would say the time to transition is there's two things. I wouldn't say fully transition or leave. I would say there's times to put things down, and then you can decide later on to whether to pick it up again. Sometimes it's you're not ready. Some meaning you don't have the right resources. We need to develop our competence, uh, not enough bandwidth. So it can be that. And sometimes it's the market isn't ready, which means there's some ideas that people had in the 70s that weren't plausible to the 90s, right? Or for our younger audience, there's some things that were in the early 2000s, whether it was CD players, right? And people want to create a more hard disk or whatever that wasn't plausible till that technology took fate. So there's something which just it can't happen because this the technology or the infrastructure isn't there for it. Um, but then there's other times when the market doesn't want that right now or may never want it. So there's several different ways to look at this. Is a huge question. There's several different ways to look at it. I would say um, on that, one of the biggest things to do is if it's really going wrong, I would say instead you just start giving it less attention, right? Start giving it less attention and let more. I don't want to ever tell people to put something down forever. It's more so saying, okay, is this in my top three priorities? First of all, if it's not in your top three priorities, I say wipe it off your list for the most part. Is this in my top three priorities? And after in life, top three priorities change over time. Then I would say, am I getting enough traction for what I need in my life now? Right. So that's outside market forces. So do I have enough to take care of myself, pay rent, take care of my home, etc.? There was a period where I had to put something down because literally I could not. I had a team of 10, 11 people, and I could not afford the metro for myself, like taking the train for myself, and I had to put something down and put it to the side. Um, and say, hey, I need to go and rebuild my revenue. Just it's not feasible to continue to, it's not feasible. So one, is it still feasible with the resources you have? Now I'm going to shift over to another side, which is if you're already doing something, you're looking at a new product line. Once again, same thing, same principle. Is it in your top three priorities, right? Is it in top three priorities because of potential, because of what it can do for you now, because of however you want to structure life? Is it in your top three priorities? And then it's, do you have enough factors to know this is not working? I know this is a very vague and non-concrete answer, but do you have enough factors to know this is not true? Have you tried different people to do this to help you? For example, I had something where we were trying to go into how could I say this? We're trying to go into federal contracting for a myriad of things for one of my businesses, and we hired three different people for this role to help us win contracts, do this, and it was not working. So after three people, it's like, okay, we've tried this for 6 to 7 months. I'm paying payroll for three people for 6 to 7 months. This is not working. And is this where we're getting the best ROI? So I put that on the shelf and said, okay, I know this has, I'm still coming back to that. And I came back to that. But I need to put this on the shelf because right now, uh, I don't see this turning around until something has to change. And I think that was my leadership. I think that's the people we hired. I think it was our strategy. So those three things need, and I started realizing, okay, these are where we need to build up competency before we go and try this again. And then when we try this again, we might find there's another hurdle. But those are some of the things I'll say to look at when considering that. Is that helpful? I know it's not a clear, concrete, do this, do that. It's more factors in a matrix.
No, 100%. That was helpful. I appreciate the answer. I would love to hear a little bit more on kind of both sides of it. So when you were talking about the factors, could you elaborate a little bit more on the timeline of that? Because when you talk about like coming to the conclusion that I can't afford the metro for myself, or coming to the conclusion that I have these people on payroll and
Yeah,
this isn't working,
yeah.
it's something that I've struggled with tremendously of almost ignoring the factors until I get to that point. Could you talk a little bit more about your experience in like what were some of the signs before you got to that, okay, something needs to change, this is too much?
Some of the signs. Ooh-wee. It's interesting because entrepreneurs, we do like crazy things. So there's always
Yeah.
signs. There's
Yeah.
signs, hey, you really shouldn't do this. So when you
Mhm.
ask me some of the signs, it's like, Which sign should I have paid attention to? I would say some signs are when you're changing the business model multiple times, right? So constantly we have to go say no, we have to hear tons of no's, hundreds of no's, right? But do you have to continuously change the business model to make it work? Or are you constantly changing the customer profile without getting new sales? There's one thing, if you start getting traction, but are you constantly changing and iterating it, but you're not seeing any traction, right? Or substantial traction. And then that's where it's like, hey, this isn't working. I keep on trying different things and it's not working. So can you continue putting all your eggs in this basket, right? Now, how long to do that? That depends on your financial bandwidth, right? So financially, where are you going and where's that red line? What do you have dependents you have to take care of, whether it's younger siblings, children, parents, yourself, etc. That changes what you can. I could do that at that time because I was single, so I can I can do that where I don't have to worry about those things. And but if you have a family, it's a different balance, right? It's a different balance to
Mhm.
consider. Um, Other factors, what's your energy level, right? What's your energy level? Can you continue pushing through? Are you losing motivation, and is it affecting your health? And I say that it's a two-edged sword, right? Because I say with health, being an entrepreneur is also not healthy in some ways because there's times where I was just eating the cheapest of foods to make it through whatever, just to be okay. I can eat this, I can afford whatnot. So it's like sometimes we harm ourselves in a way, or we don't take care of
Mm.
ourselves. But are you seeing it impact? Is it, are you looking in the future and you're really not seeing something, and you've tried it for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and really not seeing an end to that road and saying, okay, for me it was longer than that, but okay, I've been doing this a year and a half, 2 years. Is it time to put this on the shelf and come back? And that's what
Mm.
I did. I realized, so I'm an attorney, but I, out of law school, I did not go get my license, right? I went straight into my startup. All of my friends would say, no, that's crazy. You need to go into law, get money, at least go get your license. And so that's how I did. I reset by going, I got my license, I practiced a
Mm.
little bit, regained my cash, and then jumped right back into the entrepreneur pool. But it's something kind of reset. That's why I say put it on a shelf. It doesn't mean you quit it, but you can put it on a shelf and say, hey, I'm coming back to entrepreneurship, or I'm coming back to this specific idea.
Yeah, that's a fantastic outlook. I appreciate that. I think that hitting the pause is one of the hardest things that I've had to do. With the stock exchange, I did that for about a year, where I had to step away. Like I in the same vein of you're saying like, oh, I'd go and find the cheapest food to eat. I remember times where I would drink a beer while I was doing work because it was the quickest way to get calories in my body without stepping away from my laptop. Like obviously, not
Yeah. Yeah. No.
sustainable to like keep going. So taking that step back was something that was really difficult for me to do, and it was something that the stock exchange was always on the back burner. I would have these moments where I'd be in conversations with people, and I in my head I'm like, do I mention it? Do I not mention it? Do I introduce myself as the founder of this company, or do I not at the moment because it's on pause? It's something that I and most of the time I ended up introducing myself as the founder of the stock exchange, and I would talk a little bit about it and just have more casual conversations. But it was really difficult knowing that I wasn't putting my all into it. So I appreciate you kind of mentioning the part of necessity, that you have to make sure that your needs are met as a person, and that you can put food in your stomach, the roof over your head is sustainable, you can keep the lights on, those kinds of things before continuing. I feel like you kind of looked at my notes a little bit because one of the things you said touched on not the next question but one of the other questions that I had. So I thought that was a little bit funny, but kind of transitioning from that idea of how do you know what's wrong with an idea to move, my other question was more so, how do you know what's right, but instead of an idea, with relationships? So like one of the reasons I took a pause was because it was extremely difficult for me to do it as a solo founder. And one of the things I was looking for were partnerships in that year gap of like if I could find the right people, I would wholeheartedly dive back into this, but it's been too difficult to do on my own. So one thing that I've struggled with is what are the green lights? Like, how do I know I've found the right person to work with on this idea specifically?
You have a ton of great questions today, and a ton of questions that you really have to unpack. Um, that you really have to unpack. So, green lights in finding partners. I think one of the things to do is first list out what you need in a partner before seeing somebody. List out what you need and what you can contribute so you can clearly articulate, because it's hard to find what you don't know when you don't have a clear definition of what your needs, your weaknesses, your strengths. It's really hard to figure that out if you're doing that on the fly. So really list, what do I need in order to get to this in life. Now when you're looking at partner, there is, I'm always going to go back to matrices, right? There are different factors, right, you're looking for. Number one for me is character, right? Who is this person? Can I trust this person? Still, I highly suggest having a legal agreement, having things set up, but the character of the person, can you trust this person? Um, are they respected by others? Have they shown up? Are they loyal? Do they have a higher belief system? For me, right? Do they have a higher belief system, meaning it's something that they hold themselves accountable to? Things of that nature. So that's one. Two is competence, right? Can they actually do the job, right? Can they actually do the job? Meaning, do they bring some resources, whether mostly intellectual, to the table that I don't have, right? Resources, intellectual, and also capacity. Do they have bandwidth, right? Do they have the bandwidth to do this? That's something to think about. Along with character, sorry, I'm going to circle back to character. As long, do they have resilience, right? Because we talked about those days when it gets hard. Are they going to quit when it gets hard? You don't want somebody who's going to quit when it gets hard. Do they understand what they're truly stepping into when they're running a startup or creating a business? Even though you've had this for, but most people don't. It takes a while for a business to really get its footing, right? That's why we're targeting people in the year 2 to 5 range, because really is you've made it somewhat, but it's how do I get to the next level to really have the business that is sustaining itself. I'm able to pay myself and I'm able to build my team and then get to the multi-million-dollar level. And there's a gap I think a lot of people aren't talking about. I don't want to call it Death Valley. It's like, hey, I've survived the first 2 years, but now I'm in my year 2 to 5, and I don't really know if I can keep this as a going concern, right? So that's something you're facing thinking about. I also want to know. So those are two major things. I'll give some more resources on this, but I like to do, other than factors, I like to think about, give people micro test or watch people. Everybody says a good game, right? Everybody says, "Oh, I would do this." I'd just see what will happen. I remember my uh, business partner, my old business partner. One of the reasons he became my business partner, I brought him in. He didn't start off as a business. Brought him in because we had to go when I was starting this business. I wanted to go to meet somebody in Long Island. I was actually one of his connections. This was on a Saturday or Sunday. Anybody from New York? No, Long Island, it is far away depending on where you're going in Long Island, right? I didn't have a car at this time. So I had, looking for the least expensive option, had to go out to take the train out to JFK, JFK John F. Kennedy Airport, which is already a trip, an hour and a half, right? Trip on the train. And then after that, go there to rent a car because that's the cars were the least expensive, to rent a car to drive out to to drive out 2 hours, I believe, each way to go see this person. And he signed up to do that. He said, "Okay, I'll come as well." So that was my first thing. Okay, taking the train, going through those steps. All right, I'm seeing that. Second thing that was a good measure of, oh wow, this guy is serious. We running a business. A lot of times you're working late nights. He would stay. I would be there 12, 1, 2 a.m. at this place called the Gentleman's Factory, where was our co-working space. And he would stay that same time and he would work, and I'll see that continue. Like, okay, this is building my level of trust, right? And then also he was willing to risk. A lot of partners, some people don't really want to risk, and you can take partners who don't want the financial risk, but he wanted to risk instead of just saying, hey, yeah, I'll go in on your capital and I'll risk my labor. He was like, I can actually split that. And I was surprised. I wasn't expecting it, but to see somebody has the mindset, hey, I want to split that. So those are some things I'll call them micro tests, or watching people's actions in certain institutions. You can't tell me, hey, I'm going to be more serious about this when I'm in it. I need to see that you're serious about what you're doing, or you're showing that you really care about this in some way, shape, or form. Those are some things. There's plenty more. I think Patrick Bet-David did a phenomenal video on this a few years ago. I think it's like the 10 factors or something to consider when choosing a business partner. It's a great video on that. So I would suggest that as an additional resource also.
Do you mind saying the video one more time?
I believe it is something called like the 10 factors to think about when choosing a business partner by Patrick Bet-David, Valuetainment.
Really cool. I will definitely check that out. I really like what you said about the micro tests. I thought that was interesting. Kind of keeping like the building trust. Would you say there's a obviously there's no concrete time. Like I know you're not gonna be able to say like, oh, 6 months is like test time, and then that's how I know. But for that specific relationship, how much time would you say passed where you were able to say, you know what, I trust this person, and I'm willing to take a risk with them as opposed to on your own.
That's good. I think reference checks will help you. First, make sure you're doing reference checks, checking into people's backgrounds, like
Mm,
real reference checks, not like call the person up, check in, make sure you're doing following up. Uh, 3 to 6 months at least. 3 to 6 months,
mm,
I would say, to really get to know somebody and go from there. Because people can hide their personality with new people for about 3 to 6 months, right?
hmm,
So that's something to think about and wait to evaluate. Don't really jump in for, I would say, 3 to 6 months. And if if you want somebody to start, you can say, hey, you can come in and see if this works out, because there should be a testing period for both of you, and say, nope, you're not getting equity for this period, but if you do something, you'll get
hmm.
X amount of sales or something. There's other ways to structure it till that point.
Right. Wow, man, that's powerful. People can hide their selves from 3 to 6 months. That's oh, that was deep, man.
Thank you.
It's very interesting. Have you experienced like fallouts in that, like after that 3 to 6 month period of just like, wow, that didn't work? Is that how is that kind of like a school of hard knocks metric of how you came up with that time frame?
No, I wouldn't say I experienced for so I came up with that to experience, and then I had a coach. I had a coach who she actually taught me this, and she actually broke it down by gender. What you should get into, which gender you should wait longer before seeing things. Um, so that's something else. But when I say experience, I've had. Let me see what I'll share. I've So actually, let me take a step back. One thing to know is, even if somebody's your friend, a business relationship is different than a friendship relationship. Different expectations. So I would still do this 3 to 6 months with a friend in business, with friends, family, whoever. It's not just for strangers. It's also for friends and family, okay, or colleagues. It's not purely a stranger test. I would say, yep, somebody else, but I've been through it where part of the reason I got my law degree is because somebody uh, stabbed me in the back pretty hard on one of my businesses. And then after that, I trusted another person and jumped in before that 3 to 6 month mark. And that person ended up embezzling from the company. Thankfully, I was able to get the money back. But this is some of this advice is not just stuff I read or get coached on. It's things I've lived through. So that's what I'll say. Hopefully that you can skip that and not have to go through those experiences as well.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think unfortunately, it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs have to go through is those trials and tribulations, not only with the business but with the people they do business with. So I appreciate you sharing that part. I know it's not easy for a lot of people to admit that they've been stabbed in the back. It's not a it's a memorable experience, but for all the wrong reasons. So I appreciate you sharing that. Um, so again, kind of going back to the concept of risk and deciding who you should risk things with. One of the concepts that I've been playing with is opportunity cost, right? Like I said, entrepreneurs, we all have a million ideas, but there's only 24 hours in a day. Which ones do I pursue? Which ones do I pursue more than others? And how do I balance pursuing multiple ideas at the same time? So my question is, do you have any best practices for determining opportunity cost between ideas?
Yeah. So there's internal and external factors, right? So internal factors can be kind of your vision for yourself, your passion, your edge, meaning is there some insight, experience, um, intellectual propensity that you have that can help you do this type of business or succeed in this better than in another business. So those are things to think about. External factors, competition, right? How easy or hard is it to enter this industry? Um, how What are the profit margins, right? Is it going to be profitable? What are the profit margins? Labor, is it easy to hire people, build out your team? Is there a way for you to scale, right? And finally, growth prospects. Is this a growing or shrinking market? So these are some of the things to think about when you're evaluating opportunity versus opportunity and opportunity cost. I would also say within that, there's a big caveat that sometimes markets form or you combine things in a way that it can be bigger or smaller than you predicted. And it's, I think, it's interesting success. Or if you look at some of these big companies, you couldn't tell me that Steve Jobs thought Apple was going to be Apple before when he first started, right? And many other people. And I think just echoing Steve Jobs, one of the things he said is you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can always only connect them looking back, right? So sometimes all you can do is really get on the path and start. I'll say how to de-risk, and something that people don't say enough and people are embarrassed to do, which they really shouldn't. I'll say having a job that provides income, a 9 to 5 that provides income, so you're stable while you're taking this risk on the side, can is really one of the best things I think people can do, right? Is to do that and do it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. It doesn't matter how long it takes for you to be able to get the business to being able to cover your salary, and then you can move and pivot more into that. Or maybe you always do this and the business just drives by itself. It's up to you in your life. That's something. Now, saying I think many people have the stigma against I'm not an entrepreneur if I still work a 9 to 5. You can be an entrepreneur and work a 9 to 5. You have to do what makes sense for you. And you can gain skills and networks and connections from your 9 to 5. The thing I would say when doing that, make sure you're doing the best job possible for the 9 to 5. Don't treat them like, because what you do there, I believe I'm really big on character and making sure when you're partnering with somebody, when you're working with somebody, that you're giving them the best that you can. So that's something I would say. Uh, is there was another place I'll go. I think too many people starting businesses. I love that everybody wants to start a business, but entrepreneurship is not for everyone, or solo entrepreneurship is not for everyone. I would say. I think a lot of people would be better off if they stayed at their job, scaled up, because the risk and the turmoil and like the emotions that entrepreneur goes through, it is very hard to stomach. I've had so many calls with entrepreneurs who were having, and I say this, and I try to say this every time I talk about this, so people don't know they're not on an island, and this is normal in a way, having suicidal thoughts, right? And people don't talk about this in entrepreneurship. There was a small period where there was some articles coming out about entrepreneurs or CEOs committing suicide, but this is the dark side that people don't see and don't talk about. So I wouldn't push everybody into it because it's a very hard road. I would say something that is risk mitigation. Sometimes it's okay. Do I know established entity that maybe they're a little bit bigger or a lot bigger than I am, that I can go in and try to gain an equity piece or commission piece, and that's a form of entrepreneurship. You can go into a business and then help them get to the next level, right? Many people want to have their own thing rather becoming two people or three people joining forces and making something extraordinarily larger.
Yeah, I'm wow. I mean, the mental health component is honestly something that I haven't thought about in a very long time. Is like the toll that it takes on you as you go through the trials and tribulations. It's sad to hear, man. You know, like the suicidal thoughts, uh, you know, from entrepreneurship or from the turmoils of entrepreneurship. And I think
Hmm.
that kind of can play into the risk of what's riding on it. So I know you had mentioned that you were an investor, and it kind of makes me curious. Does that change the risk level? Like for me, um, you know, I've made mental health a priority a long time ago. So going through like the trials and tribulations to the stock exchange, like you said, you know, the 2 year, 2 to 5 year mark. Like I've been at this for 4 years, and am I where I want to be? No, but am I proud of the fact that I've been able to do this as a solo entrepreneur for 4 years? One hundred
It's
percent.
amazing. Hmm.
It is still, you know, like I said, I took a pause for a year, so maybe we say 3 years instead of 4 years, but it's I think the mental health aspect is one of the reasons that I took a pause.
That's good.
And it's also one of the reasons that I never, or not never, that I haven't taken on investment yet. Is I felt that it would create a different stress for me, or it would
Hmm.
create a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Motivator for being successful. Like my main ambition with why I started the stock exchange in the first place was to spread financial literacy education to as many young people as possible. So, and I told myself, you know, even in like as I started it, because I graduated with a degree in entrepreneurship. So we, you know, I learned like 50% of businesses don't make it to year two, and like terribly scary statistics for an entrepreneur. Like I was learning that from the get-go. So I told myself, you know, with or without the stock exchange, that's my objective, is to get financial literacy education in front of as many young people as possible. So I'm curious to know, you know, on the other side, as an investor, as I mentioned, that's kind of where I see some of my next steps in entrepreneurship being. Where do you notice, you know, like a difference in how the company is run when you invest in it, or does it change the dynamic where, you know, obviously like a lot of people say I want to be an entrepreneur because I'm my own boss, but you're not. You make the decisions for the business, but you're still at the mercy of your customers. You're still sometimes at the mercy of investors. So how have you seen that dynamic shift before investment and after investment in a lot of startups?
Uh, a lot of great questions, Chris. I would say I would add one more part of you. Also, sometimes at the mercy of your employees or
Mm,
contractors. So it's really people. That's why I say it's not. You're not doing this to be your own boss. You're really not, because now the CEO. I just serve a lot of people.
mm,
That's my job, is to serve a lot of people, and create situations that are win-wins for all of us, and that's how you keep it together. Now, as an investor, I think every investor has a different paradigm, or let me not say every. Investors have different paradigms and how we look at things. I come into investing as an operator. I still run and operate two companies, right? And so, and I'm also investing at a different stage. I'm investing very early. I'm doing pre-seed or seed, which means they are still figuring out product market fit, or they've just figured out product market fit, and maybe they started bringing in a bit of revenue. So it's very early stage. What I'm looking for is, and it's cliche, but entrepreneurs say you want to bet on the person and the founding team. It's better to bet on the founding team. So one, it's very hard to bet on one person because there's burnout. Right? I burned out in my first business. I was working 16, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week to make it work. Right. So that's something, and that's tough to do by yourself. Right. I was trying to get people, and I had a CTO for a bit of time, but it's very tough to do by yourself. So, but if somebody has at least one other partner, now that it brings down risk for me. It doesn't eliminate risk, but maybe brings it down 25%. Um, it's less than that, but it brings down risk. I would say another thing I look for is just, is this person, how savvy? There's book smart, there's street smart, right? And how savvy is this person, and willing, and what are they willing to do ethically to solve this problem or to make this work? Right. So if it's similar to looking at the analysis of who's on the team and what they're doing, but what have they done in the past? Do they know how hard it is to run a business? One of the one great advice I received from another investor to me is like, only invest in companies that where the founder has failed already in another venture because they've learned something. And if they're willing to do it again, then this is somebody you're more likely able to trust. They've been through that gauntlet and they're ready to start it up and do it again. uh, can they One of the reasons you want to see if somebody can build a team, if you can't sell it to other people to join your team, can I believe that you'll really scale out a business where I'll receive investment back if you can't say that to other people? So it's learning those sales, seeing, can somebody be a leader, can they learn those sales tactics to get somebody to believe in their vision, or to find, it's also prospecting, can they prospect to find other people to sign up to be on their team, which is another factor of sales. So those are some things you think of as an investor. My biggest thing, one of the things I want to do when investing, I try to do as much on the front end of screening because I don't want to be hanging over my companies that I invest in. Right, I want them know that I'm a resource. Just please send me updates from time to time. But you already have enough stress that you're dealing with. I don't want to add to that. If I do add to it, it's only to increase value for all of us, not just me, for all of us. So those are some things I think about, being an operator who also runs a business while they invest.
Yeah, totally. That's some advice I heard in the investment realm is the best companies are the ones that don't really need that hands on from investors. So it's interesting to hear that reinforcement from you. Do you have like a realm that you stay in, or industry preference when you're investing?
Yes. So I stay in things that I think has growth. I have some passion. I have expertise, so I know somebody who has expertise. So it's really 4 to 5 things. Health for angel investing, because I do my regular traditional investing, and I don't suggest, just like entrepreneur, I suggest most people do not do it because 9.99 times out of 100, you're probably not getting back money, right? For most people, it's the top tiers that maybe they're getting back money 1 or 2 times out of 10 for the really top, the high level, and then they're hoping for 1,000 to 1,000+ X return to make up for all the other things that didn't succeed. Plus, you're looking at a 5 to 12 year lockup where you're not receiving money. So I always want to say that, because a lot of people look in, hey, we're going to no, you're really looking at depending on where you invest, when you invest. But if you have pre-seed or seed, this company is probably not going to exit or be acquired for another 5 to 12 years. So you're locked in, and it's not liquid. It's not like the stock market. You can't sell it to anyone, really. So you're kind of locked in there unless they do another round and you can sell out at those rounds. So back to the industries that I invest in: healthcare tech, really healthcare, logistics, so the movement of people and goods, um, education. I run an education company just like you, so it's like I want people to learn more, so I believe in education, and then construction slash real estate tech. Those are the 4 major things I invest in. I'm also trying to invest in space. I need to figure out the business model. I tried to do one deal, I missed it, I didn't get in, so I'm not technically in space yet, but I do want to get into space. I learned sometimes by investing, and then it makes me follow up and get more passion and really dig through things. So there was one business that I want to invest in where they were doing some manufacturing. They wanted to do manufacturing out in space because of the way you can print things without gravity and whatnot, for efficiencies. But those are the fields that I invest in for angel investing.
That's really cool. I love that, like the diversity in it is kind of across the board. That's incredible. So this is kind of the last question that I had, and it kind of relates to something you had said earlier about like having a 9 to 5 as an entrepreneur, right? There's no shame in that, of having something to keep the lights on. But more so away from the money aspect and more into an experience aspect. There's like the running jokes of, all these jobs, even entry level, are looking for experience. How am I supposed to get experience if I don't already have experience? So what are your thoughts on overcoming the difficulties of experience, even in realms like investing without the initial capital, or entrepreneurship or investing?
That's a, of course, you ended with a really good question as well. So, what to do with that? I think so. These jobs that are usually looking for, I would put them in two buckets, right? You have your large corporations, which people more sorry, your large corporation, they have these hiring managers, they have this hiring process, and they're saying, hey, these are the specs of the person I want to hire, right? And usually, as sometimes they have quote unquote unrate uh, ridiculous demands in terms of, hey, I just got out of college. How do you expect a person out of college to have this experience, or etc. Then you have your small and medium-sized business enterprises, who, um, I don't want to say the most part, many of them, they're just mimicking what the large businesses do, right? So it's kind of like they're copying that. I see this job post, I'm going to copy and I'm going to tailor it to, I'm going to say, hey, do this. This is what I see the big boys doing. So I want to mimic that and do that for myself. I would suggest anybody wanting to get experience, this is where it's how much are you willing to bet on yourself? How much are you willing to bet on yourself? Uh, Two major ways to do it. Two. One is start doing a project on your own, right? Start doing some. That's why one of the things is when you're hiring, is somebody already doing the work in this field? Is somebody doing this on their free time? Can I know they're dedicated to this? So if you start doing a project and you're building out, and whether you're testing the market or you're giving out for free, whatever you're doing, product, service, etc., you're doing some piece of the job. I'm seeing, hey, you have a portfolio in this, even though you may not have traditional work experience. I see that you're actually doing this without pay. So that must mean you have uh, a great love or desire to do this type of work instead of everybody who's saying they love it, right? So you're standing out that way. The second thing I think many people don't think about enough is go intern or work for free at a startup, whether ask for commission or maybe they just raising, go for an early stage startup and say, hey, I know you don't have, but I can come work here for a while. I want to gain these types of experience. You're doing something that I kind of think is useful. If it works, I'll stay with your company. If not, can you write me a great resume reference to this other company? A startup or a nonprofit, right? Those two things that you can do, and then you can gain that experience by essentially volunteering. I think I like startups more than nonprofits in that realm, just because startups they have this pressure where they're trying to. Nonprofits have it too, but it's if you get the right startup, they'll be willing to almost let you do anything, right? As long as it's moving the business forward, and it's so you can really get a ton of experience with which you couldn't receive as a SME, small medium sized enterprise, or at a large company. So those are ways I would say to gain that experience and break into the market, right? And even if you're looking, you said VCs and raising in money. Even if you're looking from an investor perspective, investors, whether it's private equity or venture capital, they also want to have operators on their team, because everybody it's one thing to be, because an operator can analyze things differently than somebody who just read it in a book or somebody who invested. They can say, nope, it doesn't really work that, regardless of what the papers say, that's not how this works, right? I've done this. So operators can do that, and they can communicate and connect with entrepreneurs better than non-operators in many instances.
Wow, mic drop on the last question, man. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that advice. It was the one thing that you said that like rung in my head like a bell was how much are you willing to bet on yourself? And like if you really just sit there with that question, um, I live by the philosophy that time is your most valuable asset. Money comes and goes. So I
Hmm.
think, doing what you're saying and volunteering and getting those experiences that you're looking for, and there always is somebody who is trying to give you that experience. I think that's a really powerful thing. So I appreciate you saying, how much are you willing to bet on yourself? It just made me think, outside the realm of financials, like what else do I have to give? And time is probably the most valuable thing. So um,
Yeah, and I want to say thank you for saying that. I also want to say you're young. You're still young. I'm relatively young too, but you're still young. I think there's a misconception that you're supposed to have it all figured out now. You might be that's a big misconception and pressure that's being put on a lot of people your age and around your age. I don't even know your age, but I'm just presuming, right? Right around your age, and that's false, right? That is so. If you look at the data, actually, people who run the best, they usually start in their 40s. Is people in their 40s, and then they build up companies. So if we're going to look at data, that's what happened. Rather, I guess the Mark Zuckerbergs, the younger entrepreneurs who start they've been posted so much we think that's the norm. They're the exception, right? They're the
Mhm.
exception to it. I'm not saying you can't succeed at this, but you kind of need that background of information, that expertise to help you do this, that reputation, that network, those resources, and then it builds up. Like look down, if you go on a plane, most people, oh wow, I want to fly in first. If you look at first class or business class, you're mostly seeing older people, 50s and 60s, who are flying there. It's rarer that you see a young person. So I think we have a skewed image of who really has money and when they get money or when people become successful rather than actually and that's forcing you to put pressure on yourself rather than realize maybe I'm in the process and every day going out and doing your best to get better.
Yeah, that's incredible advice. I've kind of started, especially like with my age. Everyone always tells me like, "Oh, you have so much time. You have so much time." It never feels that way. I always see myself as just planting seeds, right? And then I look at all the seeds that I've planted and I say, okay, which ones are growing? Let me continue to water those.
Mm.
And then, okay, well, let's say I don't like to prioritize more than 3 to 5 things. I think that's when it starts to start dilute my concentration. So I'll only plant 3 to 5 seeds at a time, and then let's say two are growing and three are not. Then I plant two more seeds. So it's where do you kind of like go to gain those experiences or to find your ideas?
So I think you're really doing it, right? And I love that you like I love that framework. Like you brought up a great matrix that I hope people when they're watching they take away planting seeds and then pruning what's working and what's not and then replanting new ones, right? So I really love that you're doing that. Um, there's a proverb, right, that says essentially try seven ventures because you don't know which one will succeed, right? Um, so when you're doing this, eventually you're going to start seeing trends or data in what's working and what's not. And it's not always a clear connection in terms of how you got somewhere, meaning you can't predict it. But when you look back, you're like, wow, I'm glad I did this. For example, you don't have, we're here, we're doing this on Good Friday, right? You're doing this. You could be out partying, you can be out doing whatever, but you're here in this conversation, and I'm pretty sure you're doing that not just with this, but many other things in your life, like showing up at the Columbia Business Conference, right? Showing up in other spaces. All these seeds that you're planting, eventually they start to take root and blossom, and you'll be, wow, this really shot up. People remember when they see certain people showing up over and over and over again. And it may not feel like that, but after a while, you'll see how you're distancing yourself from maybe some of your peers and putting yourself in rooms that you didn't even know existed, right? Putting yourself in, and then you're going to be proud of yourself. It takes time. It's if we knew what seeds would work, we all would be very wealthy at a young age, right? But that's the process, and I love to hear. I love ending on that note or getting close to end on that, hearing that you're already doing this and planting different seeds and just trying things and pruning what's not working.
Thank you. Yeah, it always feels good to have some kind of reaffirm what you're working on, especially like someone in your stature. So I thank you for that. I know I said last question like 15 minutes ago, but you mentioned in the beginning that you had read 700 books. Um, and I was just curious because I very much want to increase the speed at which I read without summarizing. Like I want to be able to take in all the details and just read more quickly. Do you have any tips for the trade on that front?
So you touched upon this. That's a good question too, right? So increasing your reading or learning will increase your edge, Right? A lot of what I
Mhm.
said is one of the biggest things that determines our success is our information or competence edge. So that's going to how to do that. You touched on this, and I'm going to emphasize this. The four types of learning, right? Auditory, linguistic, visual, and kinesthetic. Figuring out how you learn best. Because while I recommend everybody to read, uh, is it the way you learn best? Because if it's not, it's going to be hard to sustain it until you build that habit. But start off, don't try to look at, hey, I want to read 50 books. So start off with 25. I want to read 25 books in a year, right? And you're going to gain the skills. Things I learned. I used to be, people can't believe this, but in law school, when law school started, I was such a slow reader. It took me the three times the amount of three t- um, three times the times in terms of reading than it took most of my classmates. So I had to be in the library from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. with some classes in between every single day. I actually don't go to libraries anymore because I had to do that for a year and a half till it clicked, till I got it. And I remember this. This was uh, J- January of 2014 is when it finally clicked and I started reading faster and I learned some things about my reading. So one thing I learned is reading very early. Your mind is clear. It's easier to put in information in when your mind is clear. You're not fighting other things and other stimulus. You're less likely to get so waking up at 5 a.m. You're less likely to get disrupted by other people, so you can have momentum. That's one of the things that help read more. Another thing, daylight or sunlight directly on the book. So I would angle myself against the window and then it made me read faster. So you'll start learning these tricks that'll speed up your reading. And then also because I was doing this for um, a year and a half already of like really hard, dense reading, that practice and that ability started, that muscle started building, right? And I became strong, and I was able to do longer reading, etc. So finally, when I caught up in speed, it was I went from that, and it was a short time to go from that to, oh wow, now I'm reading faster than people because I was just putting so much time into it that it didn't just stop. Hey, I caught up to people. I started going faster, and then that continued. So that's what I'll say. Another thing is a lot of my reading I do audible books, because with my job I have to read a lot. I'm reading people's messages, I'm responding to clients, I'm reading emails, etc. So I have to do a lot of that. Now, what's going on in the background on that is I'm able to put in an audible book and concentrate, right? I'm able to put in an audible book and concentrate. So these are some things to think about as well when you're reading, when you're building up that skill set, is what's the best way that you can consistently read, learn, grow, etc.
I love that we came full circle back to the educational styles. That's amazing.
Exactly.
Seriously, I can't say thank you enough. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be on your podcast. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Chris. Looking forward to catching up later. I'll let you go to the back room. Thank you so much for jumping on. And anybody else, if you're interested in coming on, free consultations, you can jump in. There's a link below where you can sign up for this mentorship coaching and consultations on business, leadership, self development advice. And we jumped into a bit of finance, which I usually don't do, but since you know this realm, we jumped into a bit of finance. Thank you so much, Chris. It was a pleasure to be on this with you.
Likewise, and thanks again.
Thank you.